Some traps are not built to catch, but to see who comes close. From the Journals of the Sixth Listener, page torn. The peninsula curved like a finger of bone, stretching into mists the cartographers had never named. They marked its edges as unstable. Beyond that, they left the map blank. Or worse, they drew things. Twisted branches, wide eyes, symbols no key could explain. People called it the overgrowth, though no one knew when it had earned the name. Even in drought, it never thinned. Even when fire licked the grasslands nearby, it refused to burn. Travelers claimed the smoke always turned back at the marshline, as if the land beyond had already burned hot enough for lifetimes. The listener came alone. He had no name here, only a designation etched in fading ink into the flap of his coat, now warped and unreadable from salt and leather. In his order, names were shed early, replaced by purpose and function. The world, they said, responded more honestly to silence than to self. He moved without sound through thin reeds, boots caked in layers of old marsh. He didn't need to check the compass or markings. He had walked this kind of silence before. His presence was not to disturb, only to confirm. Confirm the presence of life, or more often, its absence. But the silence was not like the others. It had texture, density, like breathing against glass. He carried little. A small horn carved from blackened driftwood, curved like a question mark. A reed for listening, a flask of root water, and a leather-bound field book with 3 empty pages left. Everything else was memory. That was what they trained for, to recall what the land had chosen to forget. He had crossed dozens of regions like this, once. Places gone hollow, fields that never regrew, forests that sang out of tune. But this wasn't a place that had been emptied. This was something else. Something had stopped, and something else had taken its place. The wind stopped around midday. Not slowed, not shifted. It simply stopped. The reeds that had been swaying all morning fell still at once, like a breath held too long. Even the insects seemed to retreat into the earth. He paused and placed his palm to a fallen log. It was dry, warm, not rotting. Wrong. He had been sent to this region after a series of disappearances. Not people, but patterns. The frogs had stopped singing. The moss on trees no longer grew in its usual spiral. An entire stretch of birds altered their migratory curve to avoid this point on the peninsula. Something subtle had changed, and the world had noticed. Villagers whispered about curses. Of course they did. But the listener didn't believe in curses. He believed in places that grew aware. The old walkway into the marsh creaked under his step. It hadn't been repaired in years, not since the last ferry disappeared mid-crossing. The timbers moaned like things waking up after too long in the dark. But they held. He slowed his pace, every step deliberate. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of time pressing against his back. The air here was thick with the scent of water left too long in a sealed jar. Not rot exactly, but age. Preserved silence. Each step into the swamp slowed him. Branches arched high above, dripping with silver moss like weeping strands of hair. Patches of ground looked walkable, but gave slightly underfoot. Not enough to pull, but enough to remind. This place could take him, if it wanted to. He adjusted his satchel and pressed forward, boots tapping only where wood still held. Every sense leaned outward, waiting for a pattern to break. He heard his own breath louder than the forest. He saw signs. Bent grass in the shape of human feet. A snapped branch, clean. Too fresh. Someone had passed through, but no one in the village would dare. He was not the first, only the last. After nearly 2 hours, he reached it. The clearing opened without warning. A wide ring of firmer earth stretched in all directions, thick with dark green undergrowth and a mist that clung close to the ankles. And at its center stood the tree. It rose like a relic, Its trunk bent slightly, as if leaning closer to the ground. The roots curled out and back into the earth like limbs mid-prayer. Moss clung to every surface, streaked in brown and green. Despite the marsh around it, the ground beneath the tree was dry. The tree was not native to this land. It had no sisters here, no seed line. It stood alone. He approached slowly. His horn rattled once in its sling. The silence here was heavier, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of held breath. He crouched beside one of the great roots, tall enough that a child could crawl under, wide enough to rest against. The way they arched gave the impression of arms, not in menace, but in welcome. The image unsettled him more than any threat would have. He removed the reed from its pouch, touched it briefly to his tongue, and pressed it to his ear. Nothing. Then, a hum, deep, low, and a breath drawn in, not exhaled, long and slow, like something testing the air. He froze. It was not wind. Something beneath the earth was awake. He steadied his breathing and resisted the urge to stand. Every part of his training told him to leave, but something in his chest remained still, not from courage, from a strange, quiet recognition. He had reached something old. He set the reed down gently and took one step back. "If you can hear me," he whispered, "respond." The clearing didn't move, but he felt the answer in his bones. A single leaf spiraled downward from the canopy above. It didn't fall straight. It curved midair, brushing against his cheek like a finger, then dropped beside his boot. He stared at it. Cold bloomed in his throat. That was when he understood. The quiet hadn't followed him. It had led him. He had not discovered the clearing. He had been drawn to it. The signs, the silence, the stillness, all of it had funneled him here. Not the marsh, not the wind, the tree. The swamp was never the danger. The tree was. He turned to leave. A root shifted behind him. Not a sudden strike, not a snap, just a shift, like a sleep returning in place. His foot caught on moss that hadn't been there before. He fell to one knee and reached for the etched stone in his coat, the mark of passage and restraint. Too late. The ground gave way beneath him. Not like mud, like lungs. A slow inhale. I was bait, he thought. Not shouted, just known. He took one final breath, and the roots wrapped around his legs, his chest, his throat. They did not crush. They held. They pulled. He did not scream. There was no time. Only stillness. The black horn slid free of his belt and rolled into the hollow between the roots. It stopped. Perfectly balanced. The clearing remained. Nothing marked his passage but a patch of moss pressed flat, and the softest sigh in the soil, like a breath released after a long, patient wait.